We are seeing an absolute watershed moment right now with a significant number of companies across the maritime and cargo owning community moving in the direction of truly demanding believable and real ESG data.
Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gosberg. Hello, Shipping Podcast listeners, and welcome to episode 192 of the Shipping Podcast. As you might have realized by now, I'm all for change in the maritime industry. Now I'm looking for others sharing my view and think that things are changing or will do so very soon. For that reason, I reached out to RightShip, an organization I don't know much about, but that I hear people mentioning in conversations. RightShip believe in the power of collaboration. Isn't that music to my ears? And they think that we should drive change using data. These are the people that I need to speak to. So I reached out to the CEO, Steen Lund, and talked with him. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Lena. Very happy to be here together with you today. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Steen Lund. I reside in Singapore, where I am the CEO of RightShip.
And what is your background?
So I'm a Danish national, and in terms of my career, I started longer time back than I start to appreciate now with the A.P. Møller - Mærsk organization, and went through its standard traineeship back in the late 80s. And stayed with that organization for well over 20 years and had tremendous opportunities traveling the world at a permanent basis. I was given the opportunity to go overseas after my graduation and essentially never returned back to Denmark during that whole period. So I went to countries with Maersk like Pakistan and India and several stints in Singapore. I had a good long time in Korea and in Hong Kong. So I had wonderful opportunities learning about the maritime industry from a growing company that added a number of companies to its portfolio during that period. So being part of acquisitions was a tremendous learning opportunity. And after Maersk, I thought I should try something quite different from container shipping. And I had a stint of 8 years with the classification societies, initially Germanischer Lloyd, and then was part of the merger when that merged into DNV-GL, straddling both China and Singapore. And after that period, I joined a turnaround with Radio Holland and did that for a couple of years after it had gotten new shareholders and needed some new ideas to turning their desires into that emerging company. And then I had a couple of years here in Singapore with a local ship management and ship owning company, chiefly within, for my case, digitalization. That was sort of the early days of using data in a real structured way. And it also got me into working with a number of startup companies within the maritime digital space. And I spent during those years also a handful of years together with the Singapore Shipping Association on its board, running initially the technical committee, and then later on a digital transformation committee, which was really a delight because it got me in touch with the broader industry, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises that were looking for strategies to digitalize its businesses and meet startup companies that were emerging in that space. So for someone who had come out of heavy and large enterprises, that was a really wonderful period of also learning what digitalization was really all about from all these actors. And lastly, I went from that ship management organization into RightShip a good year and a half ago. So a lot of different activities within the maritime industry, and I sort of feel that they all come together now in RightShip, where many of the learnings I've had through the different aspects of the maritime industry that I've been given the opportunity to touch are now coming together.
It sounds like a wonderful career. I'm almost envious.
It's been great fun, yes.
But may I ask you, what made you become a trainee? Why did you choose shipping?
There was no getting around the fact that in the late 80s, where I joined the AP Moller Maersk Group, was a very significant entity in Danish industry, in Danish enterprises. And certainly for me personally, it was almost sort of an organization you would view from the outside in, surrounded with a fair bit of mystique. It wasn't a very, back then, externally communicating organization. So actually the fact that it didn't communicate much, but that it looked from the outside like an incredibly impressive organization, made me very curious to understand what was inside, what was behind the walls, so to say. So it was really out of curiosity about that specific organization that I gravitated towards it, and certainly had all my dreams and many, many more fulfilled during the years in there.
The reason for me asking is that we are not very good at recruiting, are we, as an industry?
I think it depends which seat one sits in the industry. It's a conversation I often have with many different stakeholders, and I think it's fair to say that there is a tremendous lot we can do to profile the industry and profile specific individual companies. And thank you. I hope that's what we together are doing a little bit here today, shining the light on some of the things we can do. But on the other hand, there are many incredibly exciting companies within the maritime industry, fulfilling many, many different purposes. And I believe once you listen to the stories within those companies, it's very difficult not to get excited and not to want to be part of that. But it's the question of telling the story often enough and reaching a large enough audience with those stories that perhaps we historically haven't been so good at.
Yeah, I think it's also a sort of a responsibility for all of us to make sure that the profile of the maritime industry is something else that it used to be. Because if you do a Google image for shipping or seafarers, you get Popeye and Captain Haddock and things like that. And that is not what we are. We are something else. And we are a very exciting industry, and I think we should have all the bright minds should just gather to try and get into our industry. That is my hope for the future.
I share that hope with you.
Tell me about RightShip. What is RightShip? What do you do?
RightShip is a company that was established 20 years ago. And our starting story really is a very sad one, a very negative one, in as much as two of our three current shareholders, BHP and Rio Tinto, had to essentially stop the way that they were chartering vessels in, asking themselves whether they had the information foundation to call one vessel safer than another vessel when making their chartering decisions more than 20 years ago, and concluded that they simply didn't sit with that information at that point in time. And that came out of initially an inquiry that formally has been registered in Australia, known as the Ships of Shame inquiry, where 6 vessels over a period of only a year and a half went down, taking close to 100 seafarers down with them. And I think it is very important to register that 2 cargo owners essentially asked the question, how can we do this better? And ended up establishing then RightShip at arm's length from their organization as essentially mining companies. And 6 years into that journey, Cargill came along, and the 3 of them today constitute our shareholders. And they are then also users of RightShip. You ask, who are we? So that's the starting story to why did we become who we are today? Essentially, we are a digital platform. We ingest copious amounts of data from the user space, so from vessels, from port state control, from incidents happening on vessels, from vessels doing transport work through ports and terminals, from class societies, and then from AIS data, so we always know where the vessels are, and from many, many, many other good sources that we either procure or partner to obtain. And we turn that data into useful decision-making tools for charterers on one hand, and for owners, managers, banks and lending institutions, insurance companies, ports, terminals, and many others in the maritime industry that chiefly use the RightShip platform to inquire safety data, greenhouse gas emissions, rating data, and over the last half year or so, also data and insights about the health and well-being of the seafarers.
So it's all the E and the S and the G in there somewhere.
I'm so happy you pick up on that. That's exactly what it is. And we are trying very hard to understand what E and S and G means to the customers that we service, so that essentially we, through the solutions we provide and through the data that we aggregate, can respond to their reporting needs. Most, if not every single charterer, most managers, most owners will have some level of ESG reporting incorporated into their reporting structures to their shareholders, to the constituencies and the communities they work in, towards their colleagues and staff, that they will want to have believable, trustworthy and verifiable data to underpin. And that's the space we try to provide a realistic insight via our solutions in.
So what is your feeling? Where is the industry when it comes to this ESG? Are we in the beginning, or are there some forerunners who really knows what this is about and has changed their strategies accordingly and so on? What do you think?
So if we think of ESG as a journey on a time scale, then we are definitely in the relatively early days of ESG. We come out of a period where I think many people have used the label whitewashing or greenwashing, where various attempts by some parties to use data at their will for their benefit did so. And there are many examples out there where that was called out. And I believe that's largely behind us, that period. We are seeing an absolute watershed moment right now with a significant number of companies across the maritime and cargo owning community moving in the direction of truly demanding believable and real ESG data. And it's absolutely exciting to be part of that, and not just to observe that authenticity that is behind this ESG drive, but really try to also be right in there in the middle of it, and not least work with the right parties to attempt to turn standards out of this. And I deliberately use the word standard because it's still early days, and within ESG we have precious few true standards. And then there are a couple of emerging standard bearers that are really interesting to observe. So if, for instance, you look at the Global Maritime Forum, there's an emerging standard bearer there in terms of reporting emissions at a voluntary basis. And those type of emerging parties are really interesting to follow and be part of shaping their future.
Okay, so there is a lot of discussions on the environmental side of ESG. I'm interested in the S and the G. What are the companies doing there, and how can you measure it? How do you turn your data into something that we can understand and move forward from, so to say, to have a platform?
It's a great question, and it is essentially what we at RightShip wake up to every day, to ask ourselves, how can we become increasingly more relevant in that marketplace to provide not just emissions insights, but certainly also insights into the social aspects, or primarily the well-being of the seafarers. and governing aspects of ESG. So if we first look at the insights of RightShip, we govern ourselves by a vision through which we demand zero harm out of the maritime industry. And that's very aspirational. If you then start to dissect each of the E's and the S's and the G's through a zero harm lens. So through this, we essentially mean no harm to the environment. And we interpret that as providing as much transparency about the very varied and complex emission profiles of each vessels that trade, so that charterers can make informed decisions, so that ports can give credit to and encourage the most green vessels to come through their port systems, and so on and so forth. Maybe even so that seafarers can gravitate towards ship management and ship owning companies that truly seek to make a difference in terms of emissions. Zero harm to the seafarer is almost self-explanatory, and yet again, it's something that takes up a significant amount of our portfolio and of our time and of our concern, because today the seafarer does not enjoy zero harm. There is an unduly high amount of fatalities across the maritime industry if you compare those who go to work on a vessel with those who go to work on a comparable land-based industry. There are a significant number of examples of seafarers that are left without care by their original custodian and are not paid on time and are abandoned on board their vessels in port. So there's a lot of work to do to obtain zero harm to the seafarer. And there's a lot more to talk to within that whole space of the seafarer's health and well-being, both physically and mentally. And when we then look at the governance aspect of things, we are seeking to provide transparency about the safety of vessels by aggregating a safety score of each vessel that we host on our platform. We have over 70,000 vessels that we provide safety scores of. We provide a safety score of each document of compliance holder on the platform at a transparent level. We provide insights into when vessels were last inspected, and we have a host of other ways of transparently comparing one vessel with another, a fleet with another fleet, and through that giving all the actors that procure the vessels for chartering the insights that can make them make their risk-based decisions.
And I'm especially interested in diversity and inclusion, of course, in the social responsibility.
Yes, there's a lot for us to do on the DE&I scale. There's a lot of work to do. And if we just look at the gender distribution we have in the maritime industry, then it certainly is very obvious that with only about 1.2% of seafarers being female, you started by saying we should do a lot more to communicate about the maritime industry and sell ourselves better. Here's a very obvious example of much more work needing to be done. BIMCO has aggregated a seafarer workforce report that shines a really good light on that aspect, and there's a lot of good data and numbers that one can find in there about diversity within the seafarer community. And I can only encourage your listeners to review that piece of documentation. What can we do? We should ask ourselves, obviously. It's always good to try to have some solutions. I think it's really important to look at people's values, look at people's experience, rather than only, if you like, time on the clock. Men and women might be limited by returning to shore to have families, and it's not good enough to only look at time served on the vessel. I think it's very important to not exclude women just because it's felt that the rest of the vessel's crew can't, for some reason, handle working with them. Here it is the obligation of the industry to find solutions where we can coexist as men and women on board vessels as we can in all other normal workplaces. There are clearly ways where we can consider pooling resources with other organizations when people go ashore to have children, and to share also onshore roles so that it's possible to return to sea when if the female workforce is ready to do so again. I'm certain that this doesn't just limit itself to welfare of women, but certainly also the male seafarers being able to communicate when one is on the vessel and having access to Wi-Fi should be considered an absolute human right, not just a privilege. And in having that, of course, communicating with the family at home becomes as easy as it is for you and I to connect with each other today and have this conversation. So those are just a handful of specific, tangible topics that I think any good ship-owning organization needs to consider when inviting women into the workforce.
My 2 cents is that it's all connected, because if we are trying to raise the profile of the maritime industry, we need to have seafarers saying, I love my work and I am really happy with the ship owning company or the ship management company who is employing me. And I have female colleagues and they are as good as my male all of that needs to come together sometime, because that is what we are projecting to everyone else. We know that there are a lot of good things happening, but does the general public know that? And the young people that we're trying to recruit, that is my sense, that we haven't really connected the dots yet. Also here in Sweden, we got a female photographer taking photos of female seafarers. They look completely different than the photos I've seen of seafarers and female seafarers before, because it's a different lens you are looking through when you are a woman trying to show what the work is done by women on board ships. So I think that is also one thing that we could maybe encourage ship owning companies and management companies. What does your annual report look like? Is it the old fashioned? Is it the anchorage, or is it the steering wheel, or is it the ship, or is it only men seafarers, male seafarers in your photo? I mean, little things, but it means a lot. That was my 2 cents.
And I think all credit to you for flagging those comments, because you're spot on. If we don't connect the dots, if we don't accept that society is connected, then we accept by virtue of that statement a skewed society that is not gender balanced, and that quite simply isn't appropriate today. If we look at the jobs that we offer in our small little microcosmos in RightShip, then we are about 40% of our workforce today is female, and that has changed quite rapidly over the last 1.5, 2 years, with far many more female than what we used to have. A significant number of our colleagues are ex-seafarers, and I'm happy to share that many of them are female ex-seafarers. And they obviously, I don't have to even mention it, they obviously do absolutely wonderful and outstanding jobs, just like their male colleagues do. As we, across the maritime industry, require very gifted, very competent personnel for shore jobs, and that very often we require the insights that only come with having served at sea, it's evident that we will not have gender balance at shore if we don't also obtain a far better balance than the one we have at sea. So we are working as diligently as we can towards shining the light and taking action on this. My chairman is currently Jan Dielemann from Cargill, and one of my early learnings from Jan, where I thought his coaching was outstanding, was that he shared he doesn't appear on panels unless there are females on the panel. And I have adopted that because I thought, what an easy topic to copy and go out and execute. So I frequently turn down speaking opportunities if I am not offered the opportunity to do that shoulder to shoulder with competent women in the industry. And I believe it's quite important to take these sort of visible steps to not just say, yes, we have a gender policy, or yes, we are driving towards a specific goal, but you have to do it, not just talk about it. And this is one of our small ways of doing that within RightShip.
I have spoken to Jan about it because I saw when he did it in real life at North Shipping a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I've never seen that before. I call those panels for manels, and I hate them. And every woman I know in the maritime industry takes pictures of them and send them to me nowadays. So I'm collecting manels. But that is another view of our industry that maybe needs to undergo some changes. And that is the event industry, the people who are organizing conferences and events. They are not working in the industry. Their business model is to earn some money on people both coming to the event, paying for their tickets, and also for people sponsoring or companies sponsoring the event. So they don't have that insight that we have, which leads me on to saying, if you are on an ESG journey with your company, you have to stop sponsoring the events where there are only male speakers or where there are speakers who could pay for play. Because that is also something which sort of is a little bit skewed in our industry. There are not that many women at that level that could pay for play to go to the conference and have a speaking spot and get your message out. And who wants to attend those events? I don't know. That is also a reason why I started the podcast, because the things that you learned when you were at conferences in my earlier days was that I saw different ways of doing things, and people were sharing their knowledge. They wanted to share the knowledge. And then I saw some change where everyone was pay for play, and I pay for this spot so I can stand here and say how outstanding I am and my company is. So after a while, I got tired of that as well. But we really need to do something about that. An example, I saw a conference a couple of months ago, 2-day conference, 72 speakers, all men. And there were big shipping companies that were supporting this. I was amazed because they probably have an ESG or a sustainability report somewhere where it says that they are going to work for more diversity and inclusion. I'm sorry, that was my soapbox.
I love that soapbox, and I think you have every right bordering obligation to jump onto that soapbox to do what you just did now. So well done. And fortunately, I would also say there are many really good initiatives that are being taken down to individual company levels, as well as through various alliances. And there's certainly one that I thought I'd highlight in our conversation, and that's the All Aboard Alliance that has been formed out of the Global Maritime Forum, focusing both on diversity and on the equitable and inclusive approach through the maritime industry. Relatively early days, but a good 2 handfuls of significant companies with strong intentions within this space. So it's probably fair to sort of say, watch this space. The All Aboard Alliance will without a doubt help us become more informed and also guide us towards what best practice looks like. And again, it is an entirely fair position that not all companies throughout all sectors can by definition be world-class at everything we do. So we need to have some lighthouses that can guide us. And I believe the Global Maritime Forum could potentially be one of those out of this alliance. So look forward to seeing what comes out of that.
So what are the biggest changes that you have seen during your career in the maritime industry?
Without a doubt, we are in one of them right now, and that is essentially the whole decarbonization journey, and right adjacent to that, and in parallel with that, supporting it to a very large extent, is the digitalization across the whole industry. So those two are very, very significant. And I think we are, in our generation, incredibly blessed having such monumental challenges to work on. And again, this goes to once again make this industry a really, really meaningful and interesting, purposeful one to work in. If one can be part of significantly decarbonizing a very significant part of the global transport ecosystem, then one has done very, very meaningful work in one's lifetime. So those who work on those solutions and are part of framing how we meet both the regulatory and the voluntary requirements that are out there, they should count themselves really fortunate to live now. And as well supported on the digitalization side, the fact that we at very rapid speed continue to get an infusion of improved technology, meaningful technology coming our way is really a delight. So what a convergence, what a period to be part of a very exciting industry.
But how do you see the future for the maritime industry then?
I think it's very, very difficult not to be and remain incredibly optimistic. We have literally trillion-dollar challenges in terms of moving from a homogeneous fuel source to a no doubt very heterogeneous one, with essentially a whole supply chain that has to be changed. It's not just the individual vessel that will see a different propulsion system and a different propellant. It is also the whole delivery system around the world that needs to be orchestrated in a coordinated and timely fashion so that new fuels, in plural, can be delivered around the world at the same time. And that in itself is a phenomenal challenge to work on, and one I think we should all embrace very positively. So that I'd like to highlight as being the major one, and for us again at RightShip, providing transparency around the emissions in that space and the changes in the emission is something that we feel very strongly about. What we probably don't feel so positive about yet is, if I may return to it again, is the focus on the health and well-being of the seafarers. So a shameless plot here or play for participation really among your listeners is a small attempt that we in RightShip made last year to bring to life a standard that could define what good care for the seafarers looks like. So it's a co-creation with the Sustainable Shipping Initiative, with the Institute for Human Rights in Business, and with the RAFTO Foundation, where essentially we have created a code of conduct, if you like, a best practice that defines the care for the minimum care required for seafarers, and attached to that allows a document of compliance holder, a ship management company, to assess its competence against that code of conduct. And we then host that on the RightShip platform so that the industry has transparency as to which companies have performed that assessment and which have not. And since we launched this in October of 2021, close to 170 ship management companies have assessed themselves against that. And that's really quite encouraging. That brings many thousands of vessels with seafarers on board onto a platform where there's now transparency about how they are cared for. And the whole premise it's built on is one of aspiration. So we don't, as RightShip, we don't judge where on the scale of good the ship management company resides, but we provide an aspirational insight that starts with a basic compliance and then via an intermediate goes to a level of excellence. And then it's up to the ship management company itself to determine in which of the 8 chapters that the code of conduct constitutes they want to and accept that they are basic, and where they would like to aspire to higher levels of performance. That then also provides some really good conversations, because Obviously, this goes then to the strengthening of the safety management system of the individual ship management company. It goes into conversations with the crewing agency they use. It goes into conversations around competence building of the individual seafarers. And many, many small details are then being looked at. Is there a swimming pool on board? Is there sufficient vegetables being served? Is there Wi-Fi available throughout the vessel to everyone? And many small details are being considered there, which many of us with shoreside lives and jobs never have to think about. We just take them for granted because they are there when we want them. But you will only have a choice once, and that's when you decide your employer, when you're a seafarer. And once you're out there and the vessel has started sailing, what is on board is what's available to you, not more, not less.
It could also go into the conversations with governments around the world following the pandemic problems with the repatriation and all of those things, that the crew change crisis that we had when the seafarers couldn't leave the ships or they couldn't come to the ships because all these different regulations and governments didn't understand the importance of making them key personnel so that they could travel, like, for instance, flight crew and things like that.
Yes.
I think we have a momentum now. I think we need to sort of highlight the seafarers more to the governments because they started a learning curve. They had to.
I very much agree. And what we seek to do is essentially via this code of conduct to reinforce compliance with the Maritime Labour Convention and other relevant maritime conventions, but also suggest what can one do beyond just being compliant. What is out there as potential tools to use to truly show care for the seafarers. So as an example, there is a chapter in the Code of Conduct that covers payment of wages in line with the contract, something that should be taken for granted, and unfortunately something that isn't always executed in line with the intent of the contract. But that must be a basic requirement that a seafarer is paid according to contract on time without any deductions and so on and so forth. The Code of Conduct then suggests also what a ship manager can do beyond that. And that could, for instance, be financial awareness training of the seafarer. So you avoid these millionaires for a day syndromes of seafarers who may not be in possession of significant financial awareness training or competence. And of course, it's not stated in the employment contract that the employer must provide this sort of training to the seafarer, but it would be good conduct to consider that. And that can make you a more attractive employer. And it's on the same principle that the Code of Conduct is built throughout all the chapters, where then the ship management companies can choose which elements they want to extend themselves beyond the MLC and the employment contract.
This conversation could go on and on and on forever. I can hear that now. We've got so much to talk about. We need to come back, I think. Thank you for taking the time. Who do you think I should interview the next, Steen?
Well, since you have already interviewed Jan, who is always certainly to me very inspirational to listen to, then I can't suggest him. I think we should always seek to inquire the voices that we don't listen enough to. And we have had a really good conversation today about seafarers and about the importance of the female gender across the whole industry. And I know you have covered many good female colleagues and industry lighthouses in your shipping podcast. I'd love to hear more from female seafarers. It's wonderful that I, as a man, can sit and have opinions about what can and should be done for and together with female seafarers. Personally, I'd love to hear many, many more stories from seafarers that are not male. And I think also to hear from some that are perhaps not standout senior leaders on board vessels, but essentially hear what's normal life like on board a vessel if you are a female.
Okay, I will try to pull some strings and see what I can do.
Sounds good.
Thank you for taking the time to speak to me.
My pleasure.
And best of luck with all your different challenges that you're working on.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for speaking together with me today. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Steen. Every conversation matters. This was really interesting to hear. We need to talk about the things that we want to change. Maybe after discussing how things are now and why we want to change them, but every conversation matters. After doing this for almost 7 years now, I see that this platform is growing, and more people discover the power of listening to people who can make a difference. I am thankful for each and every listener. The more listeners and the more followers, the more significant chance of hitting the charts. That's where we really can make a difference. Podcast listeners worldwide might just stumble upon the Shipping Podcast and listen to how many exciting challenges we are taking on. Maybe they want to come along for the ride. I think you get it. Be part of the movement and spread the word about the Shipping Podcast. Until the next time, from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a Shipping Podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.